For nearly 2 centuries, the Roman world enjoyed the Pax Romana, a period of unprecedented peace, prosperity, and imperial stability. From the British Isles to the sands of the Sahara, Roman law, legions, and roads unified 70 million people under a single, seemingly eternal power. This golden age reached its climax under emperors like Trajan and Hadrian, with the empire reaching its greatest territorial extent in the 2nd century AD. But history is a cycle, and no golden age is immune to corrosion. Our story of Rome's eventual decline begins not with a sudden cataclysm, but with a slow systemic rot that began in the 3rd century. The first crack in the facade appeared in 180 AD with the death of Marcus Aurelius, the last of the 5 good emperors. He passed the throne to his erratic and unstable son Commodus, whose reign plunged Rome into political chaos and decadence. Commodus's assassination in 192 AD initiated a vicious cycle of civil wars, setting the stage for the true crisis. The empire was soon suffocated by the crisis of the 3rd century, 235–284 AD. This was a 5-decade period characterized by 3 interconnected plagues: invasion, inflation, and instability. Firstly, the once secure Roman borders began to crumble. On the Rhine and Danube frontiers, powerful Germanic tribes, including the Goths, Franks, and Alemanni, sensed Roman weakness and launched repeated devastating raids deep into imperial territory. Simultaneously in the east, the aggressive new Sasanian Empire of Persia rose up, replacing the Parthians and inflicting a humiliating defeat upon Rome, even capturing a Roman emperor, Valerian, in 260 AD. The legions, accustomed to victory, were suddenly fighting desperate defensive wars on multiple fronts. Secondly, the Roman economy imploded. To pay the soaring costs of constant warfare and to satisfy the demands of the troops, emperors began devaluing the currency. They mixed cheaper metals like copper into the silver coinage, the denarius, drastically reducing its intrinsic value. The result was hyperinflation. Prices skyrocketed, trade faltered, and trust in the central government vanished. Bartering replaced currency in many regions, shattering the integrated Roman market. Thirdly, political instability became the norm. The power shifted irrevocably from the Senate to the army. Commanders, backed by their legions, constantly vied for the throne. During this 50-year period, there were at least 26 legitimate emperors, all but one of whom died violently, either assassinated, killed in battle, or executed. These figures are grimly known as the Barracks Emperors. The constant civil war not only bled the army, but also allowed the barbarians and the Persians to tear away massive sections of the empire. By 270 AD, the crisis was so profound that the empire temporarily fractured into 3 parts: the Gallic Empire in the west, the Palmyrene Empire in the east, and a diminished central Roman state. The dream of eternal unity seemed dead. It was into this abyss that one of Rome's great reformers, Diocletian, would step, determined to save the empire not by restoring its past, but by fundamentally transforming its future. The Roman Empire was pulled back from the brink of total collapse by the sheer will of 2 revolutionary emperors, Diocletian and Constantine. They did not prevent the eventual fall, but their actions fundamentally reshaped the imperial structure, theology, and geography, effectively creating a new, more rigid entity that would outlive its original form. Diocletian assumed power in 284 AD and instantly recognized that the massive, decentralized empire was impossible for one man to govern and defend. His solution was radical: the tetrarchy, or rule of 4. He divided the empire into east and west, placing an Augustus, senior emperor, and a Caesar, junior emperor, in charge of each half. This system aimed to ensure stability by guaranteeing a clear line of succession and providing rapid response to invasions across all frontiers simultaneously. Diocletian also enacted massive administrative and economic reforms. He doubled the number of provinces, creating smaller, more manageable units. To stabilize the hyperinflation, he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, an attempt to freeze wages and commodity prices, although this measure largely failed due to market resistance. Furthermore, he mandated that certain professions, including farming, become hereditary, a move that secured labor but restricted freedom and made the Roman society far more inflexible. Despite his genius as an administrator, Diocletian was fiercely traditional and launched the Great Persecution against Christians, believing that their refusal to worship the state gods was invoking divine wrath upon Rome. The Tetrarchy, intended to end civil wars, failed immediately upon Diocletian's retirement in 305 AD. Chaos returned, culminating in a vicious power struggle. The victor was Constantine, the son of the Western Caesar Constantius. Constantine's definitive moment came in 312 AD at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge outside Rome. According to legend, before the battle, Constantine saw a divine sign, a cross of light, and heard the instruction, "In hoc signo vinces," in this sign, conquer. He ordered his troops to paint the Christian Chi-Rho symbol onto their shields. His victory secured him control over the West. In 313 AD, Constantine and his co-emperor issued the Edict of Milan, which legalized Christianity throughout the empire, ending centuries of persecution. This was a profound, world-altering decision. The Roman state, which had spent 300 years trying to eliminate Christianity, now embraced it, fundamentally altering the spiritual and political identity of the empire. Constantine's second radical act was geographical. Recognizing the wealth, strategic security, and Christian potential of the East, he founded a magnificent new capital in 330 AD on the site of the old Greek city of Byzantium. He named it Constantinople, the New Rome. Situated at the nexus of Europe and Asia, the city was easily defensible and close to the rich eastern provinces. This decision effectively cemented the division of the empire. Rome, the city, retained its symbolic importance, but political and military power now rested permanently in the east. By the time of Constantine's death, the empire was unified, Christianized, and geographically reoriented. But the West remained dangerously exposed and its resources depleted, relying on the strength of the East to survive the inevitable future storm. The restructuring efforts of Diocletian and Constantine bought the Roman Empire precious time, but they could not stop the tectonic forces shifting beyond its borders. In the late 4th century, a massive migration wave began, driven by a terrifying nomadic force from the east, the Huns. The Huns, a ferocious and highly effective mounted warrior people, swept out of Central Asia and into the territories of the settled Germanic tribes in Eastern Europe. This pressure acted like a colossal domino effect, forcing massive populations to flee west, directly into the Roman Empire. The first major tribe to collide with Rome was the Visigoths. In 376 AD, fleeing the terrifying Huns, the Visigoths desperately sought refuge within the Roman Empire's borders south of the Danube. Emperor Valens, focused primarily on the east, unwisely allowed nearly 100,000 Visigoths to cross the river, demanding they surrender their weapons and their children as hostages. However, corrupt Roman officials, seeing an opportunity for profit, exploited and starved the refugees. Driven by desperation, the Visigoths rose up in rebellion. The Roman response was swift, culminating in the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD. Adrianople was one of the most catastrophic military defeats in Roman history. The Visigoth heavy cavalry utterly routed the Roman legions, and Emperor Valens himself was killed on the battlefield. This was a pivotal moment. It shattered the myth of Roman invincibility, permanently exposed the weakness of the Roman infantry-centric military, and forced the empire to acknowledge that barbarian groups were now permanent, powerful actors within its territory. The political situation spiraled further. In 406 AD, an unprecedented coalition of tribes, including the Vandals, Suebi, and Alans, broke through the freezing Rhine River frontier, a line that had been the cornerstone of Roman defense for centuries. They poured into Gaul and then into Spain, carving up Roman provinces for themselves. The ultimate humiliation for the West came in 410 AD, when the Visigoths, led by King Alaric, marched on Italy and did the unthinkable. They sacked the city of Rome itself. Though no longer the political capital, Rome was the sacred heart of the empire. The sack sent a seismic shockwave across the entire Mediterranean world, symbolizing to contemporaries that the eternal city was, in fact, mortal. St. Augustine, a witness to the profound despair, was forced to write the City of God to reassure Christians that their true loyalty lay elsewhere. Amidst this chaos, the Huns, now under the charismatic leadership of Attila, re-entered the picture. Attila created a terrifying unified Hunnic empire that demanded crippling tribute from the Eastern Roman Empire. Theodosius II in Constantinople essentially bought Attila off, diverting his wrath towards the west. In 451 AD, Attila led his immense Hunnic and allied barbarian army into Gaul. The fate of the west rested on a final, improbable coalition. The last great Roman general, Flavius Aetius, managed to unite the remnants of the Roman army with their longtime enemies, the Visigoths. They met Attila at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains. The battle was a bloody stalemate, forcing Attila to retreat and preserving Roman control over Gaul. But this victory was a fleeting final breath. Rome had survived the Huns, but only by relying on the loyalty of other barbarian groups, a dependency that would soon prove fatal. The true power in the West no longer resided with the emperor in Ravenna, but with the tribal kings who controlled the land and the Roman-born generals who fought for survival. Following the temporary repulse of Attila the Hun, the Western Roman Empire entered its final, agonizing death spiral, a process marked by political farce, military helplessness, and total financial bankruptcy. The empire no longer fell to a single decisive blow, but rather eroded from within until nothing solid remained. The period between 455 AD and 476 AD saw a rapid succession of puppet emperors. The true power in the West no longer rested in the imperial capital, now Ravenna as Rome was too vulnerable, but in the hands of powerful magistri militum, masters of soldiers, barbarian generals who technically served Rome but effectively controlled the empire's remaining armies and territories. These figures, such as Ricimer and later Orestes, installed and deposed emperors at will. The emperors they chose were often weak figures, serving only to legitimize the general's control over taxation and military command. This instability meant that any serious long-term planning, whether military or economic, became impossible. Meanwhile, the financial system of the West had utterly collapsed. The rich North African provinces, the primary source of Rome's vital grain supply and immense tax revenue, had been seized by the Vandals under King Gaiseric in the 430s. The loss of Africa was an economic death sentence. Without African grain, Rome starved. Without African tax gold, the Western Empire could not afford to pay the massive subsidies required by the barbarian foederati, allies, who now formed the bulk of its defense. When the money dried up, loyalty vanished. The Vandals underscored their power by sailing across the Mediterranean and launching a second, even more thorough sack of Rome in 455 AD, looting all remaining treasures, including those recovered from the earlier Visigothic sack. The reliance on barbarian troops became a crippling contradiction. Rome's army was composed almost entirely of Visigoths, Franks, or Huns, led by men whose ultimate allegiance was to their tribe, not the dying empire. The Roman generals, such as Flavius Aetius, who defeated Attila, were themselves of partial barbarian descent. The line between Roman and barbarian had blurred to the point of extinction. The Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople, was wealthier and more secure, but could offer little more than diplomatic and financial aid. They recognized the inevitable, but could not spare the necessary resources to fundamentally resurrect the West, which was now little more than a patchwork of isolated Roman cities surrounded by independent barbarian kingdoms: Visigothic Spain, Frankish Gaul, Vandal North Africa. The final act of the Western Roman Empire was marked by a petty dispute over land. Orestes, the master of soldiers, refused to grant land in Italy to his mercenary troops, largely composed of the Germanic tribe of the Heruli. Led by their chief Odoacer, the troops revolted against the Roman general who had failed to deliver their pay and land. The stage was set for the final ignominious end of a 2,000-year legacy. The final chapter of the Western Roman Empire is remarkably quiet, anticlimactic, and swift. It was less a violent death and more the cessation of a heartbeat that had been fading for decades. In 476 AD, the Heruli mercenaries, led by Odoacer, revolted against the Roman general Orestes, as detailed in Part 4. Odoacer's forces captured Ravenna, the final Western imperial capital, and executed Orestes. Within the city there sat the last occupant of the Western throne, the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus. His name was a cruel irony, combining the name of Rome's founder, Romulus, and the name of its first emperor, Augustus, a symbol of a full circle turning into an abyss. Odoacer showed unexpected clemency. He did not execute the boy. Instead, on September 4, 476 AD, Odoacer forced Romulus Augustulus to resign his title and abdicate the throne. Odoacer then did something revolutionary. He took the imperial regalia, the crown, scepter, and purple robes, and shipped them not to Rome and not to himself, but to the true emperor in Constantinople, Zeno. Odoacer's message was clear. There was no longer a need for a separate Western emperor. He did not take the title of emperor himself. Rather, he proclaimed himself the King of Italy, ruling the territory officially as a foederatus, ally, under the nominal authority of Emperor Zeno in the east. The date, 476 AD, is often cited by historians as the official end of the Western Roman Empire. But what did this date truly mean? For the people living in Italy, Gaul, or Spain, little changed immediately. The laws, the Latin language, the roads, and the Catholic Church hierarchy remained. Life continued under new barbarian rulers who often admired and sought to emulate Roman civilization. The real death had occurred decades earlier with the loss of North Africa and the subsequent economic and military collapse. The significance of 476 AD was symbolic. It marked the final formal end of a continuous imperial line in the West that stretched back to Augustus. The survival of the Eastern Empire. While the West crumbled into a collection of Germanic kingdoms, the Eastern Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire, as historians call it, survived and even thrived for another 1,000 years. The East had several critical advantages. One, geography. Constantinople was virtually impregnable, controlling the vital trade routes between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Wealth. The eastern provinces of Egypt and Asia Minor were far richer and more stable than the West, providing a robust tax base. 3. Bureaucracy. The Eastern administration, established by Diocletian and Constantine, was highly centralized and efficient, ensuring taxes were collected and the military was paid. The history of the Roman Empire did not end. It merely shifted its capital, language, from Latin to Greek, and focus. The legacy of Roman law, Christianity, and classical learning was preserved in Constantinople, only to fall finally to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 AD. The fall of the West was not a collapse into darkness, but a transformation. It was the violent birth of medieval Europe, a new world forged from the ruins of the old, where the political structure was barbarian, but the spiritual and cultural legacy remained profoundly Roman. The question remains, was the fall inevitable, or was it merely the consequence of poor choices, bad luck, and the changing climate of the ancient world?